This is the Investor Connect podcast program. I'm Hall T. Martin. I'm the host of the show in which we interview angel investors, venture capital, family offices, private equity, and many other investors for early stage and growth companies. I hope you enjoy this episode. Need help in finding investors for your startup, fund, or angel group? 10 Capital provides funding as a service helping you find accredited investors. Contact 10 Capital to gain access to investors for angel and venture capital funds, family office rounds, and syndication raises. To learn more, go to 10capital.group. Well, hello, this is Hall Martin with Investor Connect. Today we're here with Nikita Demidov, Venture Associate at the Houston Angel Network. The Houston Angel Network is a nonprofit organization dedicated to developing the innovation ecosystem in Houston, Texas, by supporting founders and startups with financial resources and mentorship. Nikita, thank you for joining us.
Great to see you, Hal.
Great. So what was your background before investing in early stage companies? What did you do before this?
Yeah, absolutely. So my story is a little bit long, but I originally started, in finance back in Russia and doing kind of financial advisory for, big government corporations and, kind of working with corporate clients there. But in between, I really, always wanted to get education in the United States. And, fast forward, 5 years, I, get a degree in finance in Texas. And as a result, get exposed to kind of, endowment management and, more of a public market, public kind of securities. And after graduating from my kind of first bachelor degree, I got into corporate finance, working on capital projects for the kind of energy company. And it put me into this whole renewable energy industry, which I think is super fascinating. And, now I'm more in the ecosystem of startups in Houston, but most of this previous background really kind of corporate projects and more of a public equity stuff.
Great. So what excites you right now?
I think the first thing that really excites and maybe even surprises me is this whole Houston ecosystem of startups and innovation that's happening. I think coming from Russia, I would never think about Houston as a hub for startups. And I think it's kind of, perceived as a big energy capital of the world. But, after being plugged into this ecosystem for about a year now, I've just been so impressed with the talent that we have here. And, both the city, push towards innovation. And I think a lot of local support from investors to really evolve it. So I think Houston is just an amazing ecosystem now. And I'm, very happy to be in it. And outside of, kind of just geographical, the industry focus on renewables is definitely, is surprising to me to see how everyone now is in it.
That's great. That's great. So you see a lot of startups and a lot of investors in your role there with the Houston Angel Network. What's your advice for people investing in startups? What do you tell them to do before they write that check?
I think, do the diligence would be an easy one, right? But I think it's always good to develop kind of the thesis or kind of have some industry insights about the companies or the sectors that you invest in. As one example, maybe, the energy storage and batteries is a big, topic, right? And everyone is understanding that it's going to play an important role. But I personally, don't think I'm capable of making good pick on a technology itself. I'm good on understanding the trend and maybe seeing some SaaS applications, but I would never want to pick the technology. And I think when you have this kind of predetermined thesis, maybe it's easier for you to see the startups, and then someone comes in and it looks like an amazing team and it looks like, very promising startup, but you have that blockage, right? That stops you from, investing in it that, long-term might be a good fit.
Great. And then on the other side of that table, what's your advice for startups? What do you tell them to do before they go out to raise funding?
Yeah, I think, before you raise funding, you really should understand, first of all, if you really need the funding for, and what do you need it for? I think in a renewable energy space specifically, there are a lot of grant opportunities and just, innovation, support from the local and federal government that people can raise the money for. several companies I'm working with right now, they raised a bunch of their funding from, federal government or municipalities. And it's, impressive how non-dilutive fundings really can help those R&D projects and different, parts of renewable stuff. So I think, preparing yourself for the fundraise and having those grants applied, and a lot of those grants going to be contingent on, also raising the investor round. And when you go into raising this investor round and you have additional few million sitting on the side, ready to invest as soon as you, get the investors on board, I think it's, very appealing for, anyone who going to come into the round to see that there is additional non-dilutive fundings that we're going to support. And, when you go and pitch to investor, I think it's always, important to really understand who you're pitching to and the kind of industry expertise and background to be mindful of how technical you should be, or maybe how focused you should be in your presentation. Don't ever go all over the place with different opportunities that you have.
That's good advice. So let's talk about the state of startup investing. As you mentioned in Houston, it's taking off quite a bit there. How do you see the industry evolving from here for funding startups?
I'm hoping that it's only going to continue to grow. I think, last quarter was like the biggest quarter in, Houston ecosystem history. GHP published some good, interesting research around it. And I think we raised like 1.2 billion in the last 4 quarters, which is, way more than anything that happened before. And I think it's interesting in perspective of, being in pandemic, right? And like you would think that people will get more cautious, and seems like everyone is just keep piling money into startups. Maybe just you printed a bunch, but also I think, just generally it's great to see the Houston ecosystem evolving, and in general the trend for renewables continue. And we had the Greentown Lab that came to Houston, and that's exciting. And that's exciting to see a lot of young talent that comes into this industry. Being in Houston again, it's always common to see oil and gas, people and engineers, and now seeing more innovation. Like I've been talking to people who are in Europe and they're excited to come into the United States and to work on renewables now, just because there's a lot of support here. So in general, I don't see this growth slowing down anytime soon. Hopefully, the noise and like greenwashing will die out a little bit. But generally, I think it's just one of the biggest kind of exponential trends that, you'll see over our lifetime.
Great. And so let's talk about your thesis, or if you like, the Houston Angel Network. What's your investment thesis, and what's your specific criteria for pursuing a deal?
Yeah, I think for Houston Angel Network, we have 130 members who all accredited investors. And the way how Han works is, we're a group of, investors who interested in variety of different topics, variety of different industries, and have their own theses. We don't have a fund that we invest in the deals. So as a result, to pinpoint a specific Han thesis would be quite difficult because there's so many members and a lot of different industries. I think some parts that really help is, coming into Han and being successful in raising the capital from our network is, being more established and have market traction. I think, having a good team is always helpful, and also some validation from the market to make sure that, this is a startup that, have some success. Personally, on my side, and maybe in a renewable energy space, or maybe any space in general, it's great to see startups with, amazing, team that has a lot of drive. I'm much more about the jockey rather than the horse here, and I think teams can do a lot of innovation. And I always, very happy whenever we see someone who's really ready to drive the startup anywhere, and there is a lot of driving force behind it. From a perspective of business, it's good whenever you're not linked to one specific kind of market application or traction, that you can diversify your opportunities to making the revenues. I think going back to that battery example, you can make a bet on the SaaS for batteries, and if any of the technologies going to grow, then you're going to be successful. as a result of it. But those multiple approach to the revenues, to me, I think it's an important kind of point that I'm looking at the startups.
Great. And so you see a lot of challenges out there in the investor and the startup world. What are the challenges you find that startups face most today?
I think, it definitely depends on, what industry we're talking about and what level of the startup we're talking about. If you stick to those renewable topics, I think there are a lot of renewable startups, right, that are coming in. And well, maybe pinpoint one industry in specific is like hydrogen is becoming a huge topic, right? Everyone loves to talk about it. And I spent, a lot of time, thinking about it and doing additional research for different companies around it. I've met few startups only that really understand, I think, the main problem that matches, my perception is, hydrogen, for example, and around the delivery of it. And so whenever you come in and you pitch in, the new production of hydrogen without, having any market traction or anything like this, it's really hard, I think, to get the investor on board because there's so many similar companies. And so understanding how can you stand out from this crowd is sometimes, a little difficult, especially, in the virtual world where I think all of us live in these days.
Right. And then on the other side, what do you think is the biggest challenge Han investors face in today's startup world?
I think, on the same topic, right? You living in the virtual world, and the clues that you used to get from kind of in-person interactions less through the videos, etc. And like finding those hidden gems, in a crowded market becomes much more difficult. I think, we're still successful in it, but in general, there is a lot of capital chasing few great opportunities. And as a result, I think that the, terms or investment vehicles that sometimes, we would find inappropriate, but we kind of may have to run with it if you really want to put your money to work. And so understanding, kind of being more flexible, maybe on a valuation side, and also don't get too particular on sales per se, that there might be exponential growth down the road, that if you can help the startup to really get those first initial introductions, something like this, that would really help to continue to grow this company further.
Great. Well, you see a lot of different applications and sectors out there in the market today. You've talked about some here already, but if you had to pick one or two that you think are good immediate opportunities for investors to pursue, what would you put at the top of the list?
That's a great question. I think, carbon capture and storage is one of the most interesting aspects of it. And again, I think it's something that's becoming, better and better discussed topic on the federal government. I think the proposal from the administration right now has some money that's get put into it. And, a very interesting application to me is, after you capture all this carbon, what do you do with this afterwards, right? How do you put this carbon to work, either on a, hard material science, or, the fuels and, using it as a, vehicle fuel, for example. Those type of things are very interesting to me. And I think it's going to continue to grow as one of the major trends, as we see Europe really evolving in this CCUS space. And, US right now is, has a few opportunities in that as well. It's super niche, super new, and very expensive. But again, putting those exponential opportunities on the side looks pretty interesting. And then another one, yeah.
What else do you have?
I just, I think SaaS in general is pretty good for, anyone who wants to get in the space in early and angel investing, right? It's really hard to build a hardware company, and SaaS tend to be a little easier to scale. So I think, anyone who is new to the venture world, SaaS is the easiest one to start with.
Great. That makes sense for sure. Well, in the last few minutes that we have here, what else should we cover that we haven't?
I would love to hear, honestly, your perspective. You're in a Austin ecosystem, and it's, I think, a little different from Houston, the way how we look at the markets. Do you see a lot of kind of renewable companies popping up around your areas, or how is the kind of landscape changing there?
So Austin's more of a tech town, not an energy town, but we do see a fair number of applications coming up. Many of them have to go with software related tools or tech tools for energy efficiency, energy monitoring, energy capture, that type of thing. So it's coming at it from more of the software or the tech angle than it is the actual production or use of it in this case. I do think it's going to be big. I think there's going to be a lot that will come up in the way of funding, especially from the government for carbon capture, alternative energies, and even more beyond solar and thermal. I think we'll see a lot of new technologies coming in that will make it more easy to use for people as well. So in general, I think after coming out of the COVID pandemic, it's the best time to have a startup because the stock market's at an all-time high. Interest rates are near zero, and there's a whole new set of careabouts coming out, and people are getting very serious about climate change, and so there will be money available to fund and grow startups for that reason. So I think we're going to see a lot of change because the market has now moved into the position to really go after it.
Interesting. And do you think it's easier or harder to find good investment opportunities now around Austin, as everyone seems to come to the town now?
I think that's the challenge investors face in Austin is what I call the signal to noise ratio. It's there are so many startups. In fact, nationwide, I think they're looking at 6 million startups in the next 12 months coming online. And so finding good ones in all of that requires just a lot more work, a lot more deal flow management. And so we're going to have to figure out, and some investors solve that by just raising the bar. Instead of just having a good idea, you have to have a good idea and a team, or now you have to have a good idea, a team, and traction. You have to have customers. For some sectors, that's my thesis, is you absolutely have to have revenue. In cannabis, blockchain, in some sectors, there's so much going on. You absolutely have to have revenue. Don't have revenue, we just just can't get there because there's so many companies out there at this stage. So that's, I think, the challenge investors face is how do you work with all of those startups that are now out there. There's more startups, so there's more good ones. So you have to look at it from that point of view. But then now you have to manage or update your deal flow process to work with it. And one change I see is that everything is going online. I mean, everything. All angel groups are going online. Coming out of COVID, many are going into hybrid models. You can either Zoom in or you can actually come physically there. And the upside to that is you can now recruit members from outside your geographic territory. It used to be you can only look for members that would be in a certain radius of the meeting room. Now, anywhere in the US or even in the world is fair game for it. And so there's pluses and minuses that come with that. But I think it's the next stage is how do you manage angel networking in an online world? And what does that mean?
Yeah, that's definitely, I can echo both of those things. I think I've been impressed to see such good, investment opportunities given, the company has an amazing product and also have, great revenue. And then I have to compare it against just, good product without the revenue. And I understand that, the one that has traction always got to win, even if it's a little higher on the valuation. But on your comment on the virtual world, that's, we're facing the same thing here in Houston. I think one of the main reasons why people like to join Houston Angel Network is for networking itself, right? And how do we keep that communal feeling and don't get the Zoom burnout from all of the investors, right? I think we had a few in-person events over the course of last months or two, and it's been very successful. People want to see each other in person, but now, when the COVID stuff coming back a little bit, there's still, increasing concerns regarding meeting in person. But I do hope that, we can have a hybrid model where, I think for us as finding new opportunities perspective, it's been great because we're not only focused on Houston now, we can be focused on everywhere in the country and really find those best deals, and startups are not limited. But from a perspective of meeting in person, there's something about in-person communication that's really hard to replicate.
Absolutely. Well, appreciate your taking time with us today. How best for listeners to get back in touch with you?
Yeah, I think LinkedIn honestly is the best way for me. I try to stay on top of it, and if you shoot me a note on LinkedIn, I'll always reply. Maybe not the same day, but in the course of a few days. That would be the best way to keep in touch.
Great. We'll include those in the show notes. Want to thank you for joining us today and hope to have you back for a follow-up soon.
Yeah, thank you so much, Hal. It's been a pleasure and congrats on everything you guys doing. Sidan, it's been very impressive.
Great. Well, appreciate that. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Investor Connect helps investors interested in startup funding. In this podcast series, experienced investors share their experience and advice. You can learn more at investorconnect.org. Hal T. Martin is the director of Investor Connect, which is a 501c3 nonprofit dedicated to the education of investors for early stage funding. All opinions expressed by Hal and podcast guests are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinion of Investor Connect. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as a basis for investment decisions.